Hello, friends. If you're curious about the movie The Devil Wears Prada, 2006, you're in the perfect place. Don't forget to give this video a quick like, it really helps us out. And if you're new here, hit subscribe to stay updated on all the latest movie deep dives. Let's jump right in. Before the glitz, before the runways, before the thunderous echo of stilettos across sleek marble floors, there was a girl who simply wanted to write. That's how it begins. Not with a fashion montage or a sharp-tongued editor-in-chief, but with a hopeful, fresh-faced college graduate named Andrea. Just Andy to most. Armed with ambition, draped in comfortable sweaters, and blissfully unaware of what's waiting just a few elevator rides away in the towering halls of Manhattan's most ruthless fashion magazine, she steps into a world where appearance is power and the stakes are worn as sharply as the heels. This isn't just a fish-out-of-water tale. It's a transformation story. A character study wrapped in couture. A glimpse into the empire of high fashion that runs not just on beauty, but on blood, sweat, and the cold precision of taste. It's about what happens when one ordinary young woman finds herself orbiting the icy sun that is Miranda Priestly, the editor whose glance can launch, or end, careers, and whose voice rarely needs to rise above a whisper to strike fear through the bones of an entire industry. The story unfolds like a mirror held to ambition. Andy, armed with a journalist's dream and very little sense of fashion, lands a job that a million girls would kill for. Assistant to Miranda Priestly, editor of Runway, the glossy Bible of global fashion. The job, on paper, sounds like a dream. But almost immediately, she finds herself drowning in a world that speaks a language she doesn't understand. Designer names become a dialect. Aesthetics become a form of currency. Coffee orders become battles of survival. And Miranda, poised, brutal, iconic, becomes both a mentor and a warning. The power dynamic is electric. Miranda doesn't shout. She slices. Her commands are quiet, her presence towering. She doesn't just walk into a room, she takes it. Played with chilling elegance, she never needs to explain her importance. She is importance. And Andy, awkward and unsure in her shapeless blue sweaters and flat shoes, becomes the punchline to every glance, the outsider who doesn't belong. But what makes this story unforgettable isn't the ridicule. It's the rise. Andy doesn't retreat. She adapts. Slowly, subtly, she begins to transform. With the help of a sharp-tongued senior assistant, she learns the codes. The difference between cerulean and turquoise. The history behind the cuts. The unspoken rules of the fashion world where lateness is death, detail is God, and everyone's watching. Her wardrobe changes. Her posture shifts. She walks taller. Her answers are crisper. And Miranda, ever the hawk, begins to notice. What follows is not just a makeover, but a metamorphosis. Andy starts nailing tasks no one else can manage. Finding impossible manuscripts. Navigating tight schedules. Earning Miranda's impossible-to-grasp approval. The world around her begins to tilt. Suddenly, designers are whispering her name. Photographers nod. Invitations arrive. But as her skirts shorten and her boots rise, the ground beneath her personal life begins to crack. Her boyfriend, once her anchor, watches her drift. Friends question her values. And Andy begins to realize that climbing this ladder means leaving pieces of herself behind on every rung. And Miranda? She watches. Not with malice, but with a kind of cold calculation. Like she's seen it all before. The real twist of this story isn't that Andy changes, it's that the job demands it. The twist is how Miranda isn't a villain, but a reflection of every compromise made to survive at the top. She didn't become an icon by accident. She became it by sacrificing softness, surrendering vulnerability, and crafting an armor so seamless that no one dares to challenge her. And now, she watches as Andy stitches together her own version of that armor, one couture piece at a time. There's a Paris trip. A breaking point. A betrayal. and a scene in a limousine where everything cracks. What began as an internship spirals into a moment of clarity. Andy sees her reflection, not in a mirror, but in Miranda's life. The loneliness disguised by luxury. The relationships abandoned for power. The choices justified because ambition demanded it. And in that moment, beneath the glamour, the urgency, the hunger to be someone in a world that tells you you're no one unless you're seen, Andy makes a choice. A quiet one. She walks away. Not out of failure, but because she understands. Understands that what you wear doesn't define you. That being the best means little if it costs you who you are. And that sometimes, surviving the fire means refusing to let it consume you. But the final brushstroke comes not with vindication, not with revenge, but with a look. A simple, loaded glance between two women who understand each other in a way no one else could. No words are needed. Just the hint of a smile that might have almost been real, and the knowledge that everything that happened mattered. It's not just a fashion story. It's not even a workplace comedy. It's a story about choices. About how power changes people. About the masks we wear and the dreams we chase. It's about the cost of becoming something extraordinary, and the quiet strength it takes to turn back. So if you thought this film was just about handbags and heels, look again. Because underneath every designer label and editorial shoot is a beating heart. A girl torn between who she was and who the world demands she become. A boss who didn't ask for admiration, only excellence. And a world where perfection is expected, but humanity is optional. And somewhere in the middle, between the chaos and the coffee runs, the heartbreak and the headlines, a young woman learns that the most daring thing she can do is walk away from the life everyone else told her to want. Stick around, because this story is just getting started. It begins before dawn, as the city yawns awake. Coffee brews, alarms buzz, feet hit pavement. The streets of Manhattan stir with quiet purpose. Taxis slicing through fog, elevators blinking to life, and thousands of lives falling into their daily rhythm. Among them, in a modest apartment, a young woman pulls her hair back, smoothing strands into place not out of vanity, but resolve. She buttons her sensible blouse, slips on shoes that were never meant to make a statement, and gathers her dreams like loose pages. Her name is Andrea Sachs. And today, without quite knowing it, she is about to step into an empire ruled by silk and ice. There's something almost cruelly charming about the way she begins. Innocent, eager, dressed more for a college campus than the glittering tower she's about to enter. She walks with purpose but without armor, unaware that she's marching straight into the kingdom of Runway, the most influential fashion magazine in the world. A place where shoes cost more than her rent, where glances are loaded with judgment, and where one woman reigns with immaculate control. Miranda Priestley. But Andy doesn't know that yet. She's too busy clutching her resume, navigating the elevator ride, and exchanging awkward glances with assistants who blink at her like she's just walked in covered in burlap. She's not wearing Chanel. She doesn't know what Louboutin is. She thinks fashion is frivolous. To her, this is just a stepping stone, a job to pay her dues on the way to a real journalism gig. What she doesn't yet see is that she's walking into the lion's den wearing raw meat. The office is pristine, cold and beautiful. Everything about it gleams, from the glass walls to the impossibly thin editors who float past with clipboards and espresso shots. Desks are sleek, phones never stop ringing, and the tension crackles like static in the air. Andy is interviewed, sized up, and, somehow, hired. The decision is abrupt, the reasons unstated. Miranda hasn't even seen her yet. But fate, timing, or perhaps some bored impulse, lands her the position of junior assistant to the most powerful woman in fashion. When she finally meets Miranda, it's nothing short of myth. The room stills as she enters. Her coat is thrown wordlessly into someone's arms. She doesn't shout, doesn't ask for silence, but she receives it. Her voice is low, her instructions faster than thought. She dismisses entire concepts with a blink. And when she turns her gaze on Andy, it's like ice slicing through glass. She doesn't need to insult her. She just looks. And the message is clear. This girl is not one of us. Still, Andy starts the job. Or at least, she tries to. Her first days are a blur of disasters. She stumbles through designer names she can't pronounce, messes up lunch orders, forgets calls, delivers coffee that's never hot enough. She's late, overwhelmed, underestimated. The staff mock her behind raised magazines. Her senior assistant, Emily, oozes disdain, speaking in clipped tones and fashion references that might as well be in Greek. Andy, for all her education and intelligence, is drowning in a world that doesn't care about her cleverness. But she doesn't quit. She goes home each night to Nate, her boyfriend, who works in a kitchen and talks like someone grounded in something real. He offers support, teasing, and the kind of casual comfort that reminds her who she used to be. Her friends laugh at her stories about the office, the impossible requests, the designer shoes, the emails sent at 3 a.m. At first, Andy laughs too. She tells herself this isn't her, that she's just passing through. But something begins to shift. It starts small. A haircut. A pair of shoes, borrowed from the fashion closet. A blouse that fits in more than it stands out. Slowly, Andy realizes that to survive here, she needs to adapt. The moment clicks when Nigel, the magazine's seasoned art director, sharp-tongued and secretly kind, pulls her aside. He doesn't scold. He doesn't tease. He simply tells her the truth. You think this is just fashion? You think Miranda is just a mean boss? This place, this world, it's not ridiculous. It's serious. And if you don't care, someone else will. It's a wake-up call wrapped in silk. Andy begins to change. She studies, learns, watches. She starts showing up earlier, staying later. She absorbs the language of the office, the rhythm of Miranda's needs. She anticipates, adjusts, and transforms. The office stops snickering. People begin to notice. Emily, once untouchable in her aloof confidence, starts to eye her with wariness. Andy becomes competent, polished. The clumsy girl who didn't know how to spell Gabbana now schedules Miranda's meetings with designers, artists, even senators. She handles wardrobe fittings. She fetches unpublished manuscripts. She learns to answer Miranda's call on the first ring and when to leave a room before she's asked. And Miranda? She says nothing. But she stops looking through Andy. She begins to look at her. The job demands more than efficiency. It demands sacrifice. Weekends blur into weekdays. Dinners with Nate are missed, forgotten, or cancelled last minute. Birthdays are skipped. Apologies are constant. And though Andy rises within the halls of Runway, she begins to fall behind in the life she once held dear. Her friends grow tired of her absence. Nate watches her change, her clothes, her tone, her focus, and says nothing at first. But disappointment grows in his eyes. She's not the Andy he fell for. Not quite, and yet, she can't stop. She begins to feel the pull. The addictive sense of being important, of being chosen. Miranda relies on her now. The job that once crushed her is now hers to command. She's in Paris meetings via conference call, escorting designers across Manhattan, coordinating flights with a flick of her hand. She's no longer surviving. She's thriving. But every rise comes with a cost. Emily, who had once ruled over Andy with sharp comments and withering smirks, starts to feel the shift. She notices the glances Miranda gives Andy. Notices the tasks once hers quietly passed on. And while she maintains her facade, there's a tightening behind her eyes. She's not just threatened, she's being replaced. And Andy? She sees it, feels the guilt, but doesn't stop. Not yet. Because something is coming. Something bigger than she expected. Paris Fashion Week. The Holy Grail. The trip Emily has been waiting for. The reward promised. But fate, cruel and cold, doesn't always follow loyalty. And Miranda? She always chooses what's best. Not for her assistants. For her. Paris glows differently under the weight of Fashion Week. Its streets shimmer, not with stardust, but with the weight of power stitched into every hemline, every pair of heels clicking against cobblestone. And somewhere in that city of mirrored runways and midnight galas, Andy Sachs finds herself seated in the middle of it all. Draped in designer silk, a glossy invitation in one hand and her phone vibrating in the other. A week ago, this world would have felt like someone else's dream. Now it's her reality. And it's more beautiful and more brutal than she ever imagined. She didn't come here by accident. It started with Emily, faithful, ruthless, loyal Emily, who had counted down to this trip like it was salvation. She knew every event by heart, every designer's name, every canopy that would be served at every reception. Paris wasn't just a reward, it was her validation. But then came the car crash. A twist of fate on a rainy night, a sudden collision, a broken leg. And just like that, everything she'd been promised slipped from her fingers. Andy stepped in. She hadn't asked for it. Hadn't schemed. Miranda made the decision. Quiet, calculating, as always. Emily, doped on painkillers and fury, could barely form words when Andy broke the news. There were no tears. Just disbelief. And a silence that echoed louder than any scream. Still, Andy went. She told herself it was just part of the job. That she wasn't the one who chose. That it was business, not betrayal. But when the jet took off and New York disappeared beneath the clouds, something hollow opened in her chest. Something she couldn't name yet. In Paris, the days moved fast, dressed in gold and champagne. Andy navigated dinners with industry titans, accompanied Miranda through a storm of flashbulbs, translated her sighs into action, her silences into strategy. She watched models cry behind velvet curtains, watched editors whisper alliances like generals before battle. This wasn't a fashion show. It was war in silk gloves. And Miranda? She was the queen, moving pieces no one else could see. But power, even the quiet kind, doesn't come without enemies. Rumors circled like perfume in the air. The board at Elias Clark, the publishing giant behind Runway, was considering a shake-up. Miranda had made too many enemies. She was impossible, feared, envied. Whispers said she was going to be replaced. And her successor? Jacqueline Follett, elegant, connected, and waiting in the wings. Everyone knew. Everyone, it seemed, except Miranda. Until she did. Andy watched as the storm broke. At a dinner cloaked in crystal and candlelight, Miranda made her move. Not with tantrums. Not with threats. But with precision. She orchestrated deals, played rivals against each other, and when the smoke cleared, Jacqueline was given a different promotion, elsewhere. Miranda remained queen. Untouched. Unmoved. And the very people who tried to dethrone her applauded as if she'd saved them all. Andy sat in stunned silence. Later, she confronted Miranda in the back seat of a limousine slicing through Parisian streets. "I couldn't do what you did," she said, eyes wide, voice trembling. Miranda didn't flinch. She looked at Andy, not with anger, but with something far more devastating, recognition. "You already did," Miranda replied. In that moment, everything crystallized. This wasn't about clothes. It never had been. This was about identity. About how much of yourself you're willing to shed to climb. About how ambition, unchecked, eats the pieces of you that once felt immovable. Andy had told herself she was different. She had mocked the girls who starved for beauty, who bent for approval. But she had made the same choices. Worn the same masks, sacrificed her own for someone else's dreams. And worst of all, she had become good at it. So the next morning, before the day could pull her back in, Andrea made her choice. She walked away. Not with drama. Not with a scream. Just one last glance at the world she had conquered, and then a quiet step out the door. She left behind her phone, a lifeline once chained to Miranda's breath, and disappeared into the streets of Paris like a woman waking from a long, beautiful nightmare. Back in New York, life did not wait. Her apartment felt smaller, colder. Nate was distant, confused, still wounded from all the nights she hadn't shown up. Her friends were polite, but the gap between them had widened. Andrea tried to apologize, to explain. But how do you explain losing yourself in velvet and praise? Slowly, she rebuilt. She walked into interviews, not as the girl with dreams, but as the woman who had stood beside a dragon and survived. Some looked at her resume and blinked. "You worked for her?" they'd ask, as if that explained everything. And maybe it did. Because one day, a newspaper editor looked at her and said, "If you were with her for a year, you can do anything." And he gave her a job. Not a corner office. Not a glossy spread. But a chance. A few days later, walking through the streets she once raced through with coffee orders and clutched planners, she saw her again. Miranda. Surrounded by guards and editors, exiting a building like a monarch. Their eyes met through the glass of a limousine. A pause. A memory. Miranda didn't wave. Didn't smile. But her eyes softened, just for a second. It was enough. Because in that glance, everything was said. Miranda knew what Andrea had done. That she had walked away not out of weakness, but strength. That she had chosen herself in a world where very few ever do. And Andrea knew what Miranda had given her. Not just a career, not just experience, but a mirror. A reflection of who she could become, and who she refused to be. And as the car rolled away, Andrea smiled. Not the smile of victory, but the smile of someone who knows she survived. Someone who faced the fire, danced in it, and came out whole. Not unchanged but more herself than ever before. In stories built on style and ambition, it's easy to get lost in the surface. The gleam of designer fabric, the drama of a phone slammed down mid-demand, the click of high heels like a war drum through the marble halls of a Manhattan tower. But beneath the gloss and glamour, beneath the tailored suits and magazine covers, this story pulses with characters so vivid they cut deeper than the finest silk. They live not in fantasy but in truth, stubborn, messy, elegant, compromised truth. And in that truth, we find why this story endures. It isn't just about fashion. It's about identity. At the center, orbiting chaos and couture, stands Andrea Sachs. Andrea, as we first meet her, is a whirlwind of potential in the wrong outfit. She's bright, grounded, and so clearly unshaped by the world she's about to enter. There's a softness to her confidence, the kind that comes from years of being the smartest person in the room but never the most stylish. She sees herself as immune to superficiality, armed with morals and a passion for journalism, but unaware of how deeply her convictions will be tested. In the beginning, she's easy to root for. She's earnest, slightly awkward, a good person. But what makes her compelling isn't just how much she changes, it's how subtly the change begins. Andrea doesn't fall into darkness all at once. She adapts. She survives. At first, her choices feel small. Swapping out her shoes, learning the lingo, brushing her hair the way the others do. But each decision chips away at who she thought she was. And what's most haunting is how capable she becomes. How quickly she begins to shine in the system she once judged. The transformation isn't just in her wardrobe. It's in her posture, her voice, her decisions. And that's what makes her arc so human, because we all, at some point, change to fit in. We all compromise. The question becomes, how much is too much? Then there's Miranda Priestley. She's the hurricane in heels, the eye of the storm, the character who dominates every scene with whispers rather than shouts. From the moment she arrives, without even making eye contact, we know exactly who she is. Powerful. Precise. Dismissive. But that's just the silhouette. The truth of Miranda is far more complicated. She isn't cruel for sport. She's efficient. She isn't heartless. She's armored. Her expectations are impossible not because she's sadistic, but because her entire world is built on perfection. And she's survived by becoming the standard. What's brilliant about Miranda is that she isn't softened by a tragic backstory or redeemed by a third-act apology. She remains exactly who she is, sharp, emotionally distant, terrifyingly good at her job. But we see glimpses, brief, aching moments, where the armor slips. A scene in a hotel room, makeup off, voice tired. A comment about her divorce and the toll it takes on her daughters. She doesn't cry. Doesn't collapse. But for one fleeting moment, we see that being Miranda Priestley comes at a cost. Not just to those around her, but to her. Miranda isn't a villain. She's a survivor. And in many ways, she's Andy's potential future. They mirror each other, young idealist and hardened realist, slowly circling the same fire. Miranda sees herself in Andy. That's why she begins to trust her. That's why she allows her closer than most. And Andy, despite herself, sees Miranda not just as a monster, but as a woman. One who made hard choices. One who carved power from a world that never gave it freely. Their relationship is never tender. But it's intimate in its own strange way, like two people seeing each other's scars in a world that worships polish. Emily Charlton, the senior assistant, is often mistaken for comic relief, but her character carries a quiet tragedy. She's the product of the system Andy enters, a woman who has given everything for a chance to be near power. She's sharp, committed, bitter, exhausted. Emily isn't warm. She isn't kind. But she cares. She cares so deeply about being seen, being valued, that she's sacrificed sleep, food, relationships, all for Miranda's approval. And what makes her arc heartbreaking is that she doesn't get what she's earned. She loses Paris. She loses Miranda's favor. And she does so with quiet devastation, because she knows the rules. She knows that in this world, loyalty is not rewarded. It's expected. And when Andy takes her place, it isn't just betrayal. It's proof that in this world, no one is irreplaceable. Nigel, played with impeccable grace and wit, becomes the soul of the office. He's a mentor, a voice of reason, and a man who has made peace with the machine he works inside. Nigel doesn't pretend that fashion is noble, but he respects it. He understands that the art of beauty matters, even if the people behind it don't always behave beautifully. His relationship with Andy is one of the few in the film built on truth. He doesn't flatter her, doesn't coddle. He tells her she's being naive, that she can't change the game until she learns the rules. But Nigel, too, is betrayed. He's promised a new role, a new life, and then Miranda, in a desperate move to save her throne, sacrifices him. She doesn't do it with malice. She does it with the same cold logic she applies to everything else. And Nigel, ever graceful, swallows it. Because he understands the game. He's been playing it longer than anyone. But his face in that moment, his smile that doesn't quite reach his eyes, says everything about the silent heartbreak of being passed over again and again for the sake of someone else's survival. And then there's Nate. Nate, the boyfriend left behind, the man who once loved Andy's authenticity and now stares at a version of her he doesn't recognize. He's not perfect. His frustration sometimes curdles into petulance. But he represents the life Andy is drifting away from. The normalcy. The stability. The self she once protected. Their fights aren't explosive. They're sad. Resigned. Like two people slowly realizing that love isn't always enough to bridge a widening gap. Nate is the moral voice of the story, not because he's righteous, but because he's constant. He reminds Andy of who she was. And when she walks away from him, she's not just leaving a boyfriend. She's leaving a version of herself she no longer fits into. It's a painful choice. And perhaps the most human one of all. Even minor characters, like the icy editors, the spinning interns, the formidable Jacqueline Follett, serve as echoes of the central theme. What are you willing to become in order to matter? That's the question every character faces. Andy asks it of herself as she watches her old life slip away. Miranda asks it every time she closes her office door. Emily asks it through gritted teeth as she trains someone to replace her. Nigel asks it when he gets passed over for the 1000th time. And the answer is never clean. Because that's what makes these characters so enduring. They don't represent archetypes. They represent choices. Hard ones. Messy ones. The kind that don't come with clear lines or clean endings. By the end, Andy chooses herself. She walks away. Not back to who she was, but toward someone new. Someone who understands what it means to bend and chooses, instead, to stand. Miranda doesn't chase her. She simply watches. And maybe, in that glance, there's respect. Maybe, just maybe, there's pride. These characters don't teach lessons. They reflect them. They ask you to look at your own life, your job, your ambition, your compromises, and wonder, how much of yourself are you willing to trade for success? And more importantly, how will you know when it's too much? Some films arrive perfectly pressed and polished, like a runway model stepping into the light, poised, effortless, camera ready. But behind that final gleam, behind every high-heeled strut and every withering glance on screen, there's often a hidden story. And with this particular movie, what unspooled off-camera was just as captivating and strange as what shimmered on it. You see, for a film about fashion, about impossible bosses and impossible standards, it was never just about appearances. The making of this film came wrapped in whispers, last-minute pivots, casting shifts, improvisations that became iconic, and enough surprises to fill an entire fashion week. Let's start with the name that everyone remembers, Miranda Priestly. Cold, regal, immaculately cruel. But here's the twist, not everyone wanted to play her. Before Meryl Streep stepped into those heels and claimed the role forever in cinematic history, the part had been offered to another acting powerhouse, Glenn Close. She turned it down. So did a string of other actresses. Some were wary of playing such a terrifying woman. Others feared the character would be too one-note, too villainous. But then Meryl walked in and changed everything. Not just the casting, but the entire tone of the role. You see, in the original script, Miranda was much more like a caricature. Loud, outrageous, constantly shouting. But Meryl had a different idea. She envisioned Miranda as still, deadly, like the quiet of a storm you don't realize is surrounding you until the lightning strikes. She based her performance on Clint Eastwood, low voice, little movement, total control. And that decision? It altered the entire DNA of the film. Her voice barely rises above a whisper, and somehow that's more terrifying than any scream could ever be. And she didn't just alter her delivery, she altered the script. Before signing on, Meryl demanded a meeting with the studio. She made it clear she wouldn't play a cartoon villain. She wanted Miranda to be complicated. Not cruel without cause, but powerful, and trapped in a system that punished softness. She even added one of the film's most haunting moments, the hotel room scene in Paris, where Miranda appears without makeup, her hair down, her mask momentarily lowered. That wasn't in the original draft. Meryl insisted it be included to show that even the most intimidating woman in fashion had cracks beneath the lacquer. And because of that single scene, Miranda Priestly became more than iconic. She became real. Then there's the fashion. So much of the film's texture comes from what the characters wear. Every stitch, every stiletto, every perfect handbag. But here's the strange part. The production's costume budget was relatively small for such a high-fashion film. Director David Frankel and costume designer Patricia Field had to get creative. And Field, who'd already dressed the world through Sex and the City, pulled off a minor miracle. She borrowed clothes. Hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of designer garments were lent to the production. Some pieces came directly from the runways of Paris and Milan, arriving still tagged, still scented with couture mystique. One single coat worn by Meryl in the opening act was valued at over $12,000. And the wardrobe for Andy's transformation? Field curated it like a visual narrative. Early Andy wears loose sweaters and muted colors, while transformed Andy enters the frame with structured silhouettes, high boots, and bold choices. One of the most memorable accessories, those Chanel boots, caused a sensation after the film's release, instantly becoming a wishlist item for fashion lovers worldwide. And Hathaway herself admitted she could barely walk in them at first. But almost didn't get the role. The studio originally wanted someone else. Rachel McAdams, riding high after Mean Girls and The Notebook, was the first choice. But she turned it down, multiple times. She wasn't interested in doing another fashion-centric, chick flick type movie. So the producers looked elsewhere. And Hathaway, still proving herself beyond her early Disney days, wasn't a frontrunner. She had to fight for it. Legend has it, she wrote the words, "Hire me," in the soil of an executive's potted plant during a meeting. Whether that's entirely true or just myth wrapped in desperation, no one's denying that she campaigned hard. She saw something in the role. A way to tell a story about change and identity. And in the end, she won the part, not with flash, but with persistence. Which, when you think about it, mirrors Andy Sachs all too perfectly. Emily Blunt's story is no less fascinating. She wasn't supposed to play Emily. In fact, she wasn't supposed to play anything. She was in Los Angeles auditioning for another film entirely. But when she read for the part, using a version of her real British accent, the room fell silent. She transformed the character from a flat secondary role into a scene-stealing force. Blunt improvised some of her best lines, including that infamous, "I'm just one stomach flu away from my goal weight." She wasn't being cruel. She was being honest about the world her character had bought into. Blunt brought both comedy and tragedy to the part, and it earned her rave reviews. But here's the kicker, she almost didn't make it to set. She was already contracted to another film, Aragon, and had to fly back and forth between productions. There were days she'd shoot all night on Dragons and Swords, then catch a plane to step into Heels and Attitude. She was exhausted, but the chaos only sharpened her performance. That edge? That slight frantic tension in her eyes? It wasn't all acting. And then there's Stanley Tucci. He joined the film only 5 days before shooting his first scene. The original actor cast as Nigel dropped out unexpectedly, and Tucci was called in at the 11th hour. You wouldn't know it watching the film. His chemistry with the cast, especially with Anne Hathaway, is seamless. Tucci's portrayal added soul to the story. Nigel isn't just snarky, he's a survivor. A man who's given everything to the altar of fashion, who knows he'll never be editor-in-chief but still gets up every day and gives his all. Tucci imbued Nigel with warmth, wit, and quiet resignation off-camera. The bond between the cast was surprisingly warm for a movie so icy on the surface. Meryl, though feared in character, was reportedly generous and funny between takes. She wrote personal letters to cast members at the end of filming. And Hathaway later revealed that Meryl stayed in character during filming, but in a soft, respectful way, not by yelling or being cold, but by keeping a quiet distance. It created a tension that served the story without ever crossing into cruelty. And here's another strange ripple from production. The crew never expected the film to become a massive hit. It was a summer release, modestly budgeted, and seen as a niche film for fashion fans. But when it opened, it exploded. Audiences didn't just enjoy it, they devoured it. It earned over $325 million worldwide. It was quoted, rewatched, studied. It became a cultural touchstone, not just in fashion, but in any conversation about workplace power dynamics, toxic mentorship, and the personal cost of ambition. Critics praised Meryl's performance with near-unanimous awe. She received an Oscar nomination, one of the few times a comedic performance rooted in subtlety broke into the often stiff Best Actress category. And even Anne Hathaway, years later, said it was a defining moment in her career. A film that taught her the difference between acting in a movie and carrying one. But maybe the strangest fact of all is how much the real fashion world embraced it. Runway is a fictional magazine, but insiders knew who it was modeled after. Anna Wintour, the real-life editor of Vogue, was rumored to be the inspiration behind Miranda Priestly. And when the film was released, everyone wondered, would she hate it? She didn't. The film's ending is notable for its subtlety. There's no dramatic fallout. No grand punishment or reward. Andy finds a new job, not glamorous, not powerful, but hers. She runs into Miranda on the street. They exchange a glance. Miranda looks away. Then, just before entering her car, she smiles. Barely. That half-second smile has been dissected endlessly. Was it approval? Was it pride? Was it recognition? The ambiguity is part of its brilliance. It allows the audience to draw their own conclusion. Was Miranda proud that Andy walked away? Or simply amused that she thought she could? The film doesn't answer. It doesn't need to. Because by that point, we already know the truth. Critics hailed the film as more than a comedy or fashion satire. It was praised as a rare studio picture that treated its female characters with complexity. It didn't ask them to be likable. It asked them to be real, to be complicated, to make mistakes, to chase things they might not even want, just to see if they could catch them. It's this emotional resonance, the quiet tragedy of ambition, the cost of transformation, the delicate balancing act between authenticity and assimilation, that gives the film its staying power. Long after the clothes have aged, long after the trends have faded, this story still cuts close. Because it speaks to something timeless. Who are you when the world asks you to be someone else? And what will you sacrifice to matter? The film doesn't preach. It doesn't offer answers. It offers a reflection. One stitched in silk, sharpened with stiletto points, but unflinchingly honest. And in that honesty, it found its place, not just on runways or in theaters, but in the hearts of everyone who's ever had to choose between fitting in and standing firm. And everyone who's wondered if success is worth the soul it asks for. Some films arrive fully formed in the eyes of the audience, polished, graceful, iconic. But what we see on the screen is often just the tip of something far more chaotic, collaborative, and unpredictable. And with this particular story, a tale that would go on to define a generation's idea of fashion, power, and compromise, the road to its creation was paved with surprises, rewrites, bold casting choices, and more than a few behind-the-scenes miracles. Because bringing this film to life wasn't just about finding the right wardrobe. It was about threading the needle between sharp satire, emotional truth, and glossy, irresistible charm. The production itself began with a challenge. How do you adapt a novel deeply rooted in a very specific world, one that had its claws in real-life fashion royalty, without alienating the very industry you hope to satirize? The book, after all, had already stirred whispers. Its author, a former assistant to a notoriously intimidating fashion editor, had crafted a fictional world so eerily familiar that insiders could spot the references from a mile away. Everyone wondered, would the fashion world shut its doors on the film? Or worse, would it mock it? But the team behind the project, especially director David Frankel and producer Wendy Feinerman, knew they had something special. They just had to get it made. The casting process was its own whirlwind. And Hathaway wasn't the studio's first choice. Not even close. Early talks centered around other actresses. Names like Kate Hudson and Rachel McAdams floated in the air. McAdams in particular was courted aggressively. The studio loved her, saw her as a perfect mix of earnestness and star power. But she turned it down. Repeatedly. She didn't want to play another young woman in a glossy, romantic setting. And Hathaway, meanwhile, was campaigning quietly and relentlessly. She understood the character of Andy deeply. She knew what it meant to feel like an outsider in a world that didn't take you seriously. At one fateful meeting, she reportedly walked up to an executive's desk and, with a smile, wrote, "Hire me," in the soil of a potted plant. Whether it's fact or legend, it's become part of the movie's mythology. Eventually, her persistence paid off. But everything changed when Meryl Streep signed on. It was the casting decision that transformed the film from promising to iconic. And from day one, Meryl brought something entirely different to the table. She didn't see Miranda Priestley as a villain. She saw her as a woman who'd been forced to operate in a world that demanded steel, sacrifice, and control. She envisioned a softer exterior hiding a fortress of unspoken truths. And she insisted the script reflect that. One of the most famous additions, the scene where Miranda removes her makeup in a Paris hotel room and speaks candidly about her impending divorce, was Meryl's idea. She didn't want her character to be a monster. She wanted her to be human. That humanity, of course, extended behind the scenes. While Meryl famously stayed in character during production, keeping a quiet, reserved distance from the rest of the cast, she was never cruel. She didn't yell. She didn't intimidate. But her silence created an energy on set. When she walked into a room, everything shifted. And that tension, that reverence, bled into the performances around her. And Hathaway later described it as both terrifying and transformative. She never broke character, and said. And it made every scene feel real. Emily Blunt's journey to the film was almost accidental. She wasn't even auditioning for this movie. She was reading for another role on the Fox lot when someone saw her, heard her accent, and asked her to come in. She read once. Then again. And before she knew it, she had created a character that barely existed in the original script. Emily, the senior assistant, was meant to be smaller, less visible. But Blunt's biting delivery, razor-sharp comedic timing, and unexpected vulnerability turned her into a breakout star. Many of her best lines, like the now iconic "I'm just one stomach flew away from my goal weight," were improvised or shaped in the moment. That line, in particular, became a point of fascination for audiences and critics alike. It wasn't just funny. It was tragic. It told you everything about the character in one breath. Then came the challenge of costuming. For a film that was all about fashion, the team didn't have the kind of budget you'd expect. They couldn't just buy racks of couture. So costume designer Patricia Field, already known for her groundbreaking work on Sex and the City, did something almost unprecedented. She called in favors. She convinced fashion houses to lend their clothes. Chanel, Valentino, Prada. The wardrobe that ended up on screen, valued at over $1 million, was largely built from borrowed pieces. Meryl alone wore over 40 different looks, each more elegant and lethal than the last. And Hathaway's transformation wardrobe, the one that marks Andy's shift from outsider to insider, was a visual story in itself. Field used color, silhouette, and layering to signal change. Early Andy wears slouchy sweaters, earthy tones, unflattering shapes. But as she begins to internalize the culture around her, her wardrobe sharpens. Accessories appear. Lines get cleaner. And her posture shifts with them. The moment she walks into the office in Chanel boots and a black ensemble that stuns even Miranda, that wasn't just a fashion moment, it was a plot point without dialogue. In fact, she attended the premiere, wearing Prada. And afterward, she praised the film, acknowledging that it captured something essential about the world she ruled. For a woman known for never showing her cards, it was as close to a blessing as Hollywood could have hoped for. In the end, this movie became more than a workplace dramedy. It became a prism, refracting fashion, power, ego, and transformation into something universal. Its legacy isn't just stitched into pop culture. It's whispered in job interviews, quoted in fashion schools, referenced by those who faced bosses who never needed to raise their voice to command a room. And the weirdest part? It was never meant to be all this. It was supposed to be a small story, an adaptation of a sharp little book, a peek behind the curtain of high fashion. But somehow, with the right cast, the right improvisations, and just enough accidents along the way, it became something unforgettable, as if by design. Or maybe, just maybe, by fate draped in couture. It starts simply enough, just a girl in a sweater walking into a world she doesn't understand. And yet from that first frame, there's something more pulsing beneath the surface. This isn't just a tale of fashion, or ambition, or the rise of a fresh-faced outsider. This is a story about compromise, identity, and power dressed in couture. To the untrained eye, the film unfolds like a high-gloss comedy. But to look closer is to see something far more piercing, a study in how success seduces, how power isolates, and how the smallest decisions can carry the greatest weight. Beneath every snappy line and camera-ready strut lies a deeper, darker thread, and it's there, in those quiet, flickering moments, that the real impact of the film begins to settle in. The moment Andrea Sachs enters the Runway office, everything shifts. It's a moment that many have described as the through-the-looking-glass point of the story. She's out of place, visibly uncomfortable, and painfully unprepared. She doesn't know the names. She doesn't know the faces. But most of all, she doesn't know what the world she's stepping into really demands. Critics have pointed out that this early setting isn't just about establishing conflict, it's about building contrast. Andy's muted tones against the fashion hive's sharp lines and colder hues serve as more than a costume choice. They are a visual metaphor for alienation. But what truly elevates this moment into something critical and long-lasting is what it sets in motion. The office isn't a job, it's a machine. And Andy, whether she knows it or not, has just stepped onto a conveyor belt. One that won't stop until it's reshaped her. A major pivot point in the story, and a moment that critics often highlight as the film's emotional turning point, comes in a conversation between Andy and Nigel. It seems minor at first, just a pep talk between co-workers. But Nigel's words cut sharper than any tailored suit. "This is not just stuff," he says, eyes hard, voice edged with disappointment. "You think this has nothing to do with you." It's a monologue often celebrated by critics not just for its clarity, but for its layered significance. Because what Nigel is really saying is, you're here. Whether you like it or not, you're in this world now. That exchange elevates the entire first half of the film. It reframes the narrative, forces the audience to realize that Andy's arrogance, not just her ignorance, is the very thing keeping her from understanding the stakes. The fashion world, which the film so carefully crafts as both intoxicating and terrifying, is no longer a cartoonish backdrop. It becomes a battleground. Not just for beauty, but for legitimacy, for identity, and most of all, for survival. The Paris trip serves as the story's crucible. It's the point of no return, the apex where Andy's transformation is both most visible and most devastating. From a critical lens, this portion of the film acts as a mirror of earlier moments. Where Andy once stumbled in flats, she now glides in heels. Where she once rejected the world of high fashion, she now commands it. She moves through the streets of Paris with grace, her expressions polished, her replies rehearsed. But the haunting brilliance of these scenes lies in what's missing, the sparkle in her eyes, the lightness in her laughter. This contrast didn't go unnoticed by critics and film scholars alike. Many observed that the visual choices made during this section, the deep, moody blues of the lighting, the sterile calm of the hotel room, the harsh clarity of Parisian lights at night, serve to emphasize a sense of emotional vacancy. The city is romantic, beautiful, alive. But Andy is none of those things anymore. She's a shell draped in designer threads. Then comes the hotel room scene. Miranda, stripped of makeup, hair loosened, sits on the edge of the bed, weary and cold. It's a scene that many critics have pointed to as the soul of the film. For all her power and control, here she is, just a woman. Not invincible. Not untouched. Just human. And the beauty of the scene is in its restraint. There's no breakdown. No monologue. No tears. Just silence. The admission of her impending divorce. The vulnerability. The quiet, almost imperceptible tremble in her voice. It's not a surrender. It's a warning. Miranda doesn't ask for pity. But she shows Andy what lies at the end of the road she's walking. This is what winning looks like, alone, exhausted, armored beyond emotion. It's a devastating moment not because it's sad, but because it's honest. Critics lauded the scene for its unexpected depth, calling it one of the few times a film about work dares to show the human cost of excellence. Then comes the betrayal. Jacqueline Follett was supposed to replace Miranda. That much had been decided, whispered, plotted. But Miranda, as always, plays the long game. She uses her power, her intuition, her relationships, to outmaneuver her enemies. And she wins. She keeps her job. But she sacrifices Nigel to do it. That act, the cold removal of her most loyal ally, echoes like a bell through the final act. Andy watches it unfold. Watches Nigel's quiet devastation. Watches Miranda's shrug of inevitability. And she realizes, this is who I'm becoming. From a critical perspective, this is the true climax of the film. Not the resignation, not the final goodbye, but this moment of self-recognition. The realization that success in this world comes at a price, and that price is always other people. Andy sees herself in Miranda, not because she's cruel, but because she's competent. Because she's become so good at surviving that she's forgotten how to feel. It's this realization that leads to the true resolution. Andy walks away, not in rage, but in clarity. She doesn't make a speech. She doesn't demand recognition. She simply leaves her phone behind and walks into the Paris crowd, faceless once more. She dissolves back into the world, reborn. And that choice, quiet as it is, has resonated deeply with critics and viewers alike. Because it's not about rejecting power. It's about reclaiming self. Shooting in real locations was both a blessing and a challenge. The production filmed inside the McGraw-Hill building in Midtown Manhattan, transforming its glass and marble spaces into the towering offices of Runway. Filming there meant dealing with strict schedules, security concerns, and the ever-present hum of actual publishing offices just a floor away. In Paris, things got even trickier. The production was granted rare access to shoot during Paris Fashion Week, but they had to work fast. Some scenes were filmed guerrilla-style, catching the city's chaos and glamour without much rehearsal. And those crowd shots? Often filled with real fashion editors, models, and stylists who just happened to be passing by. The chemistry among the cast was another unexpected blessing. Despite the power dynamics on screen, behind the scenes there was camaraderie. And Hathaway and Emily Blunt formed a fast friendship, often joking between takes and sharing stories of career mishaps. Stanley Tucci, who joined the film just days before shooting, immediately clicked with both actresses. His portrayal of Nigel brought not only gravitas but heart. And off-camera, he was known for lightening the mood, cracking jokes, and sneaking snacks to extras waiting through long setups. Perhaps one of the most delightful quirks from production came from Meryl herself. Before filming began, she wrote personal letters to each of her co-stars. In these notes, she introduced herself not as Meryl, but as Miranda. The letters were thoughtful, perfectly in character, and set the tone for the relationships they'd be building on screen. And Hathaway described hers as simultaneously encouraging and chilling. It was Meryl's way of drawing a line, of saying, let's do this right. And yet, even with all the effort, all the craft, no one on set truly realized what they were making. The studio saw the film as a small summer comedy, a niche film with limited appeal. But once it hit theaters, everything changed. Audiences connected instantly. Critics praised its sharp writing, layered performances, and surprising emotional depth. It became one of the highest-grossing comedies of its year, earning over $325 million worldwide. And perhaps more importantly, it embedded itself in the culture. Quotes from the film became part of everyday conversation. Florals? For spring? Groundbreaking. By all means, move at a glacial pace. That's all. These weren't just lines. They became shorthand for sarcasm, wit, and the strange brutality of corporate life. Years later, the cast still reflects on the experience with awe. And Hathaway has called it a defining moment in her career. Emily Blunt credits it with launching her into a new level of opportunity. And Meryl? She won a Golden Globe, earned an Oscar nomination, and added another layer to her already legendary career. But more than that, she helped shape a film that resonated with anyone who's ever had a tough boss, a grueling job, or a moment where they looked in the mirror and wondered who they were becoming. Because that's what this film was, behind all the production polish. It was a story about evolution, about how work changes us, about the price of proximity to power, and the strange, wonderful, sometimes heartbreaking ways we grow. And the fact that it all came together, through borrowed dresses, improvised lines, whispered performances, and late-night shoots on Parisian streets, is, in itself, a small miracle. A film stitched not just with fabric, but with fire, friendship, and fate. In a story where appearances speak louder than dialogue, where image is everything and perception holds the power of currency, the world in which the characters move becomes more than just a backdrop, it becomes a silent character in itself. And in this particular film, a tale woven through ambition, reinvention, and fashion, the settings do more than stage the scenes. They breathe. They shimmer. They stare back. From the polished glass towers of New York City to the romantic decadence of Paris, every location whispers its own version of the truth, heightening not only the stakes but the internal landscapes of the people caught within them. It all begins in Manhattan, a city that doesn't wait for anyone. The morning montage of women getting dressed, applying mascara, sliding into heels, and grabbing croissants they won't eat sets a tone both frantic and aspirational. These shots aren't just about fashion, they're about becoming. About the ritual of transforming oneself before stepping into a world that demands beauty, precision, and the illusion of ease. The cinematography here is kinetic, gliding from apartment to subway to sidewalk with a rhythm that mimics the pulse of New York itself. This city doesn't just move, it struts. And within that movement, we find our protagonist, a woman noticeably out of sync. Andy Sachs, in her baggy sweater and sensible shoes, stands out not because she's loud, but because she's wrong. The lobby of Elias Clark, the publishing house where Runway magazine resides, is cavernous and glassy. It's all clean lines, muted palettes, and sharp reflections. When Andy steps inside, she's absorbed by the space. The camera holds her at wide angles, letting us see how the environment swallows her, dwarfs her. She's not just out of place, she's invisible. But that's the point. The setting in those early scenes is designed to overwhelm. Runway's office is a temple of taste. Desks are immaculate. Walls are adorned with high-fashion spreads. The color scheme is cold. Blues, grays, whites. Everything is pristine, bordering on sterile, and Miranda Priestley's office, at the far end, feels more like a throne room than a workplace. The production design here does more than establish power dynamics, it enforces them. The layout of the office reflects the hierarchy of the entire company. Assistants are in constant motion. Editors hover like shadows. And Miranda's space, encased in glass, acts like both a fishbowl and a fortress. She sees everything. Nothing escapes her notice. The way these spaces are filmed tells us just as much. Miranda's office is often shot from low angles, giving her a towering, statuesque presence even when she's seated. Her scenes are edited with minimal cuts, allowing her stillness to dominate. When she speaks, the camera doesn't move, it waits. Conversely, Andy's early scenes are full of jump cuts, handheld movements, slightly skewed angles. She's never settled. Never steady. The cinematography mirrors her discomfort, her sense of being off balance in a place that values poise above all else. Then, slowly, as Andy adapts, the visual language begins to shift. Her walk becomes more confident. Her wardrobe more fitted, bolder. And the camera begins to mirror her evolution. Tracking shots become smoother. The angles more level. The spaces around her, once intimidating, now respond to her. The city doesn't shrink, but she begins to take up more space within it. There's a confidence in the composition of her scenes. Even the lighting changes, softer, more flattering, with golden undertones that suggest not just beauty, but belonging. One of the film's most iconic montages, Andy's transformation, takes us through the streets of New York like a catwalk. The camera glides past fountains, staircases, and avenues as she struts in designer outfits, each look more commanding than the last. The city becomes her runway. The setting, once so hostile, is now an extension of her. She's in step with the world around her. And the visual grammar tells us everything we need to know. She's not chasing the pace anymore. She's setting it. Yet even at her most polished, the settings continue to remind us what's at stake. Her apartment, shared with her boyfriend Nate, remains warm and cluttered, a stark contrast to the icy precision of Runway. Here, the lighting is amber, the walls imperfect, the furniture soft and worn. It's the only space in the film that feels lived in, human. And as Andy changes, that space grows more and more alien to her. The lighting in those scenes grows dimmer. Shadows cling to corners. The air feels heavier. It's as if the apartment is mourning the version of her that once called it home. And then there's Paris. When the film shifts to the City of Light, everything becomes heightened. The color palette sharpens. Blacks become richer, whites more luminous. The streets gleam after rain. The interiors, gilded, historic, breathtaking, stand in contrast to the sleek modernism of New York. Paris isn't just a new setting. It's a dreamscape, a place of fantasy, temptation, and irreversible change. But it's not all beauty. Paris, for all its elegance, also becomes the place of reckoning. It's in a lavish hotel room, lit in shadow and soft lamplight, where Miranda finally shows her cracks. The setting here is crucial. Stripped of her office, her assistants, her curated power, Miranda seems smaller. Not weak, but real. And the room reflects that. It's intimate, dim, the bed unmade, her makeup half removed. The camera doesn't swoop. It stays still, lets the quiet settle in. The environment finally matches the emotional truth of the moment. And as Andy watches Miranda explain how she's going to sacrifice Nigel to save herself, the lighting changes again. Cold returns. The Paris night, once enchanting, now feels suffocating. Andy walks outside, and the camera lingers as the lights of the city flicker around her. She's at a crossroads, not just professionally, but existentially. The setting becomes symbolic. Paris, the city of reinvention, has forced her to see who she's becoming. It's in that very moment, amid the flickering gold of a city that has seduced her, that Andy chooses to walk away. And when she does, the film's visual language returns to its beginnings. We see her not as a silhouette in heels, but as a young woman in a trench coat, alone in the crowd. The wide shot reminds us that New York hasn't changed. The world hasn't waited. But she has. She's different now. She's choosing something else. Even the final shot, Andy watching Miranda from across the street, leans into setting as emotional punctuation. The cars pass between them. The noise returns. But when their eyes meet across the divide of city and glass, the moment lands not with grandeur, but with quiet recognition. The setting, once so overwhelming, now holds them both in balance. Because that's what the film does so masterfully with its environments. It doesn't just use them for style. It uses them for truth. From boardrooms to brownstones, from editorial spreads to Parisian ballrooms, the spaces in this film tell their own story. They reflect status. They mirror emotion. They elevate conflict. And they evolve alongside the characters, showing us not just where they are, but who they are, at their weakest, strongest, and most uncertain. So while the clothes are unforgettable, and the performances unforgettable, it's the world of the film that lingers quietly in the mind. The subway steps. The click of heels on office tile. The light through Miranda's window at sunset. Each frame, each room, each city block, designed not just to be seen, but felt. Because in a story built on image, it's the spaces between the lines, the glances, the silence, the rooms we walk through, that reveal the most. Behind every polished film lies a living, breathing mess of humanity. Early call times, coffee-fueled rewrites, bad lighting, broken shoes, spontaneous laughs that break character and sometimes break scenes entirely. But few productions walk the tightrope between chaos and control quite like this one. For a movie that would come to embody sleekness, high fashion, and crisp perfection, the truth behind the camera told a very different story. One full of unplanned magic, whispered rewrites, unexpected friendships, and the kind of once-in-a-lifetime chemistry that couldn't be faked, even with the best lighting. From day one, there was a sense that this film wasn't going to be simple. Sure, the story was compelling. The dialogue was sharp. The setting, irresistible. But none of it would matter without the right energy on set. And it all started with a name that set the tone for everything. Meryl. She arrived quietly. No fanfare, no diva antics. But the weight she carried was unmistakable. Meryl Streep was already a legend when she took on the role, but what no one quite expected was the way she would inhabit Miranda Priestley. She didn't just wear the clothes. She became the storm behind the heels. And yet, she did it without ever needing to raise her voice. The choice to portray Miranda as composed, still, and dangerously quiet wasn't in the script. That was Meryl's instinct. An instinct that turned a powerful character into an icon. To create the distance that Miranda held in every scene, Meryl made a subtle decision. She would stay in character throughout filming. Not in a harsh, method-acting way. She wasn't rude. She didn't isolate herself with demands or diva behavior. But she maintained a certain emotional space from her co-stars. She didn't share jokes between takes. She didn't buddy up over lunch. And because of that, when the cameras rolled, the tension between her and the cast felt raw and real. And Hathaway once said, she was never unkind. But she wasn't available either. And that was brilliant. And herself came into the project with something to prove. The studio hadn't wanted her initially. She was too wholesome, too soft, not what they imagined for the world of high fashion. And fought hard. She met with every executive, showed up ready, kept campaigning. There's a now famous story about how she wrote "Hire Me" in the soil of a potted plant during a meeting with a reluctant studio head. Whether or not that's entirely true doesn't matter. What matters is that it feels true. And that persistence would end up mirroring Andy's arc perfectly. Once she was cast and dove in. She shadowed real magazine assistants. She learned the rhythm of Manhattan mornings. She rehearsed until every line landed, not with performance, but with authenticity. On set, she was tireless. When she filmed the now iconic transformation montage, she practiced walking in those sky-high Chanel boots for days. Her ankles ached. She fell more than once. But she refused to let the clothes wear her. And then came Emily Blunt. The role of Emily, Runway's biting, brilliant senior assistant, was originally minor. A supporting character meant to exist as little more than comic contrast. But then Emily walked into the room. British, unapologetic, razor-sharp. Their chemistry wasn't just scripted, it was lived. They joked between takes, bonded over the surreal experience of filming in actual fashion world spaces, and navigated the absurdity of walking around set in 6-inch heels while pretending it was normal. Emily once confessed that she and often tried to make each other laugh during serious takes, which, given the number of reshoots caused by stifled giggles, sometimes drove the crew up the wall. One of their favorite shared pastimes? Guessing what Meryl was actually thinking during her long, silent scenes. They never dared ask. But they'd trade glances once the director yelled, "Cut," wondering if they'd pleased the Queen of Runway or merely survived her. Stanley Tucci, who played the wise and weary Nigel, joined the cast almost at the last minute. The actor originally cast in the role had to drop out days before production. Tucci stepped in, read the script, and began filming almost immediately. Despite the rush, his portrayal added depth and warmth to the film in a way no one saw coming. On set, he was everyone's favorite uncle. He cracked jokes, brought snacks, offered advice, and managed to deliver lines that were as heartbreaking as they were hilarious. He also brought unexpected improvisation. One of the most touching moments, when Nigel says, "That's all," wasn't in the script. It was a quiet nod to Miranda, echoing her own signature dismissal, but filled with meaning. The line lingered, not because it was dramatic, but because it said everything Nigel couldn't. That blend of restraint and emotion became Tucci's trademark throughout the shoot. Then there were the more surreal moments. Filming at the McGraw-Hill building, the real-life stand-in for Elias Clark, meant that cast and crew had to navigate a working office building. Often, actual editors and employees from various publications would peek in during filming, starstruck and silent. Once, an intern accidentally wandered into a shot and stood frozen as Meryl walked past in full Miranda mode. She didn't break character. Just paused, turned, gave a long, withering stare, and continued walking. The intern fled. The scene made it into the final cut. In Paris, things only got wilder. The production was granted limited access during Fashion Week, a logistical nightmare that turned into cinematic gold. Shooting in real locations meant the team had to work fast. Some scenes were filmed in between actual events. At one point, Anne Hathaway had to shoot a scene while fashion editors passed by, utterly unaware they were walking through a film. The city itself became part of the film's energy. "Paris didn't just host us," one crew member said. "It performed." But not everything went smoothly. Wardrobe malfunctions were constant, and split the seam of a couture dress 5 minutes before filming. Emily tripped on a cobblestone street and sprained her wrist. Heels snapped. Weather turned unexpectedly. At one point, a carefully orchestrated outdoor shot was ruined by a rogue tourist who wandered into the frame mid-proposal. The crew, hearts melted by the moment, let it happen. Then res-hot the scene. One particularly memorable disaster? A scene involving Miranda's coat being flung onto a desk, shot over and over because the coat wouldn't land quite right. It had to fall, not flop. Meryl tried again. And again. After the 7th take, she tossed the coat with such flair that it knocked over a stack of papers, and the team applauded. That take stayed in. Through it all, director David Frankel kept things steady. He knew the story wasn't just about fashion. It was about transformation, about power and choice and pressure. He often reminded the cast, the clothes are just the packaging. The real story is inside. He encouraged improvisation, welcomed vulnerability, and ensured that even the smallest scenes felt lived in. His direction kept the film grounded, even as the world around it sparkled. By the final day of shooting, something had shifted. What began as a film no one was sure about had become something else. There was a weight in the air. A sense that they'd captured lightning in a bottle. When Meryl wrapped her final scene, the cast clapped quietly. No speeches. No grand gestures. Just a shared understanding. A moment of stillness that mirrored the way Miranda herself might have said goodbye. Years later, the cast would look back with awe, and Hathaway called it one of the defining roles of her career. Emily Blunt credited it with changing her trajectory. Tucci said it was the most accidentally meaningful film he'd ever made. And Meryl, in her signature understated way, simply said, "It was a good story. It had teeth." Behind the scenes, it was never perfect. But it was real. A set built on chaos and magic, where every scene was a collaboration, every glance a gamble. Where actors became characters, and the city became a mirror. Where the most powerful woman in the room didn't need to shout, and everyone else learned how to watch. It all begins with a choice, simple, unremarkable, disguised as a job interview in a towering Manhattan skyscraper. A girl walks in wearing clothes she didn't think twice about, dreams tucked into her coat pocket, and a resume that whispers potential. What she doesn't realize, and what we come to learn alongside her, is that the elevator ride she takes that morning isn't just into a new building, it's into an entirely different self. A self that will be shaped, stretched, tested, and tempted. And that's where the true soul of the film begins to reveal itself. Beneath the tailored coats and silver hairpins, beneath the boots and attitude, this isn't just a movie about fashion. It's a meditation on transformation, identity, and the subtle surrender of self in the name of success. The story dances with themes so quietly, so elegantly, that they sometimes go unnoticed until they've already left their mark. But make no mistake, every outfit, every glance, every silent elevator ride carries more weight than it seems. One of the central themes woven through the fabric of this narrative is identity versus assimilation. Who are we, truly, when the world insists we become someone else? Andy Sachs arrives as herself. She's unfiltered, unfashionable by industry standards, and deeply rooted in the idea that who she is enough. But she's entering a world where appearance is substance, where language is coded in designer labels and power is worn like perfume. At first, she resists. She mocks the culture. She believes herself immune to its spell. But slowly, her edges begin to blur. She trades her sweaters for Chanel, her idealism for pragmatism. And though the film paints this transformation with glamour, it never lets us forget that it comes at a cost. Her boyfriend Nate, her friends, her very sense of self, each one slips a little further away as Andy sharpens herself to fit the silhouette the job demands. That's the seduction of assimilation. It whispers, "You don't have to change. Just adjust." But the line between the two vanishes fast. And Andy's journey becomes a mirror to anyone who's ever tried to survive in a system that wasn't built for them. How much of yourself are you willing to change to be accepted? And once you've changed, how do you know if any of the original you is still left? Miranda Priestley exists on the far end of that arc. She is what happens when assimilation becomes a permanent identity. She has learned to speak the language of perfection so fluently that it no longer feels like a mask. But the mask never comes off. Not really. That's where one of the film's most haunting themes lies, the loneliness of power. Miranda walks through rooms that silence at her presence. She is revered, feared, envied. But she is not known. Not by her staff, not by her peers, not even, perhaps, by herself. Her power isolates her. It builds walls instead of bridges. And in the rare moment when she does drop her guard, barefaced in a Paris hotel room, her voice soft, her marriage dissolving in real time, we see the cracks. The exhaustion. The cost. She is not the villain the story prepares us for. She is the cautionary tale. A woman who reached the top of the mountain and found it cold, lonely, and impossibly high to climb down from. Her armor is not cruelty, it's survival. This leads us into another thread running deep beneath the surface, femininity and the workplace. The story doesn't just explore women in power. It explores how they wield it, and how they're perceived for doing so. Miranda is commanding, unapologetic, and unyielding. She never raises her voice. She never needs to. But the world around her, the industry, the gossip, the subordinates, paints her as monstrous. Had she been a man, that same leadership would have likely been labeled assertive or visionary. Instead, she is described as a bitch, a tyrant, a nightmare. The double standard isn't shouted, it's whispered. And that whisper is deafening. In contrast, we see Andy, initially more palatable, more agreeable. She apologizes, hesitates, tries not to offend. But the more competent she becomes, the colder the reactions around her get. Her boyfriend pulls away. Her friends judge her. Because the truth the film doesn't flinch from is this: women who begin to succeed are often seen as abandoning something. As if excellence and likability cannot coexist. Symbolism flows through the film not in grand metaphors, but in details, most notably, in fashion itself. Clothes in this story are not just costume. They're transformation. Communication. Armor. Andy's first-day outfit, shapeless, practical, soft, symbolizes not just her outsider status but her comfort in who she is. She isn't dressing to perform. She's dressing to exist. But as the film progresses, each new outfit signals a shift. The clothes get sharper, more defined, structured, until she's walking through the office in thigh-high boots and sculpted jackets, becoming the very image of the world she once ridiculed. But those boots aren't just fashion. They're a signal. They say, "I belong here." Or at least I want to. And when she finally walks away from that world, her outfit is subdued again. Not a regression, but a reclamation. She has tasted transformation, seen its power, but chosen not to be consumed by it. Even Miranda's iconic white hair and monochromatic wardrobe carry weight. They symbolize control, precision. She doesn't wear bright colors or embellishments. She is the statement. Every outfit she wears is calculated, clean, and immune to trend. She doesn't chase fashion. She sets it. That neutrality in her clothing contrasts beautifully with the fire in her eyes, an unspoken reminder that true power doesn't scream. It whispers. Another rich theme that unfolds quietly is loyalty and betrayal. Emily, the senior assistant, devotes herself to Miranda, to Runway, to the idea that if she sacrifices enough, she'll eventually be rewarded. She lives on coffee and stress. She memorizes every schedule, every designer, every expectation. And still, when Paris comes, when her dream is just inches away, it's handed to someone else. Someone newer. Someone who didn't play by the rules. The betrayal stings not just because it's unfair, but because Emily believed that loyalty meant something. And her heartbreak is mirrored later when Nigel, the heart of the office, is passed over for a promotion Miranda had promised. He doesn't protest. He doesn't rage. He simply sighs, smiles, and adjusts his tie. Because in that world, betrayal is not the exception. It's the currency. And still they stay. Which brings us to the theme that perhaps resonates the most deeply: choice. Every character in the film makes choices. Andy chooses to adapt. Emily chooses to sacrifice. Miranda chooses to protect herself. Nigel chooses to stay. And none of these choices are framed as right or wrong. They are simply human. Complicated. Messy. Understandable. The brilliance of the film lies in its refusal to judge those choices. Andy walks away, but she doesn't get to go back to who she was. That person is gone. She knows more now. She's seen more. She's compromised, if only slightly. And she'll carry that with her, in every interview, every new job, every late night when she wonders what could have been. Miranda watches her go, but doesn't stop her. Doesn't chase. Because she, too, made a choice once. A long time ago. And in Andy, she sees not a failure, but a different path. A version of herself that might have chosen differently. Even the simplest objects in the film carry layered symbolism. Miranda's desk, always immaculate, reflects her inner order. Her insistence on control. The coats she drops on Andy's desk are not just tasks. They're dominance, a physical reminder of her status. The cell phone Andy carries is more than a line of communication. It's a leash. When she throws it into the fountain in Paris, she isn't quitting a job. She's severing a chain. And perhaps most powerful of all is the sound that defines Miranda. Silence. She doesn't scream. She doesn't demand attention. She simply exists, and the world responds. That silence becomes its own language, a space where fear grows, respect deepens, and vulnerability hides. In the end, the film doesn't claim to have answers. It doesn't tell us whether Andy made the right choice, or whether Miranda's way is the only way to lead. It simply shows us a world, a mirror, and asks us to look at the parts of ourselves that change when we chase something too hard, at the friendships that bend when priorities shift, at the quiet moments when we wonder who we're becoming. Because beneath the sparkle and the sarcasm, beneath the $1,000 coats and editorial spreads, this story is about something all of us face, at work, in love, in life. Who do we want to be?